For decades, Thailand held a rare position in global tourism. It was a place people trusted without hesitation. You didn't need extensive research, detailed budgeting, or strict planning. Travelers arrived with a loose idea of what they wanted, confident that Thailand would fill in the gaps. That confidence came from experience. Thailand was known for being forgiving. If you chose the wrong hotel, it usually wasn't a disaster. If you overspent one day, you could balance it out the next. Transportation was simple. Food was affordable. Comfort came easily, even for travelers who weren't trying very hard. That reputation still exists, but it no longer tells the whole story. On the surface, Thailand looks unchanged. Airports are operating normally. Hotels remain open across major cities and resort areas. Beaches still see activity, especially during peak season. Restaurants are busy in the evenings, and traffic congestion hasn't gone anywhere. To someone passing through briefly, it may feel like tourism never slowed down at all. But for travelers who stay longer or who have visited Thailand before, a subtle shift becomes noticeable. Trips feel tighter than they used to. Money doesn't stretch quite as far. Small expenses appear more often, and they add up faster. What once felt spontaneous now feels calculated. What once felt flexible now feels scheduled. Thailand hasn't suddenly become expensive in a global sense. Compared to many destinations, it can still feel affordable. The difference lies in expectations. Thailand built its reputation on delivering more value than travelers anticipated. When that balance shifts, even slightly, the change feels larger than the numbers suggest. Returning visitors notice it first. They remember when extending a stay felt effortless. They remember choosing destinations on impulse. They remember how long a modest budget could last. Now, decisions require more thought. Bookings happen earlier, stays are shorter. There's less room for detours. First-time visitors may not feel this immediately. Everything still feels new, and the country still delivers many of the experiences it's known for. But even among new travelers, questions surface more often than they used to. Not dramatic complaints, just quiet comparisons. Is this still the best value? Is it worth staying longer? Should we split time elsewhere? Thailand isn't empty, and it isn't facing a sudden collapse. What's changing is the emotional relationship between the country and its visitors. Tourism depends heavily on how a place makes people feel. When confidence turns into calculation, behavior follows. The shift isn't obvious in a single moment. It reveals itself gradually, through shorter stays, tighter budgets, and quieter conversations. And once that shift begins, it reshapes travel patterns long before official numbers reflect it. Thailand still attracts millions of visitors, but the way those visitors experience the country and the expectations they bring with them is no longer the same. One of the first things travelers notice when they return to Thailand isn't a single dramatic price jump. It's the accumulation of small changes that quietly reshape the experience. Hotel prices are often where that realization begins. In areas that were once known for consistent value, rates now fluctuate more sharply. Budget accommodations still exist, but availability is less predictable and quality varies more than it used to. Rooms that once felt like safe, no-regret choices now require closer inspection, more comparison, and earlier booking. Mid-range hotels have shifted as well. Properties that used to offer comfort at modest prices now position themselves closer to international standards. Amenities remain, but the sense of getting more than expected has softened. Travelers aren't necessarily unhappy. They're just less surprised. Food tells a similar story. Thailand is still famous for affordability, especially at the street level. But even here, costs have edged upward. Meals that once felt effortless now require a bit more budgeting. In restaurants, especially those frequented by visitors, prices increasingly resemble those found in other global destinations. The gap between local and tourist pricing has widened, and travelers notice the difference. Transportation adds another layer of friction. Short taxi rides cost more than many expect. Ride-hailing prices fluctuate based on demand. Domestic flights, once an almost impulsive purchase, now reward careful timing. None of this prevents travel, but it changes how people move. What used to be spontaneous becomes planned. These shifts matter because Thailand built much of its tourism success on flexibility. Travelers didn't just pass through, they lingered. They extended stays without hesitation. They upgraded rooms on a whim. They tried different cities simply because it was easy to do so. As costs rise, even modestly, that behavior changes. Travelers become more selective. They lock in itineraries earlier. They commit to fewer destinations. Instead of wandering, they optimize. This is especially noticeable among long-stay visitors. Digital nomads, seasonal travelers, and retirees once viewed Thailand as a place where comfort and affordability aligned effortlessly. Many still do, but more of them now compare Thailand against alternatives they hadn't considered seriously before. Nearby destinations have become more competitive. Countries that were once seen as less convenient now offer comparable experiences at similar or lower costs. Improved infrastructure, clearer visa policies, and targeted tourism strategies give travelers more options than ever. Thailand didn't lose its appeal overnight. What it lost, gradually, was its sense of ease. When a destination stops feeling easy, it begins to reward planners rather than wanderers. That subtle shift changes not only who arrives, but how long they stay and how deeply they engage. Trips become shorter. Spending becomes more deliberate. Loyalty becomes conditional. None of this suggests that Thailand has become unwelcoming or overpriced. The country still offers value, beauty, and cultural depth. But value is relative, and perception matters. For years, Thailand benefited from being the place where money stretched further than expected. As that gap narrows, even slightly, the psychological experience of travel changes. And when travelers feel they need to think more carefully before every decision, the country no longer feels like the effortless default it once was. That change doesn't register as a crisis, it registers as hesitation. And hesitation, over time, reshapes tourism just as powerfully as any sudden downturn. When people hear that a place may be running out of tourists, it's easy to imagine empty streets and shuttered businesses. But tourism rarely disappears all at once. More often, it moves. In Thailand, the crowds didn't vanish. They shifted. Some areas still feel busy, especially during peak seasons and major holidays. Airports continue to process large numbers of arrivals. Well-known landmarks remain popular. Beaches still fill during the right times of year. On the surface, this can make it seem like nothing has changed. But outside those moments, the gaps are more noticeable. Secondary cities feel quieter than they used to. Beach towns that once relied heavily on international visitors now see more domestic tourism filling in the gaps. Nightlife districts that previously operated at full intensity every evening now open selectively, concentrating activity into weekends or specific streets rather than spreading it evenly across entire areas. The rhythm has changed. Tourists are no longer dispersing as widely as before. Instead of exploring multiple regions in one trip, many visitors now choose fewer destinations and stay within well-defined zones. Well-marketed hotspots remain active, while nearby areas experience longer stretches of quiet. This redistribution has consequences. Businesses that once relied on consistent foot traffic now depend on seasonal spikes. Staffing becomes harder to predict. Operating hours shrink. Some venues close temporarily during slower periods, reopening only when demand justifies it. At the same time, regional competition has intensified. Southeast Asia is more connected and more accessible than ever. Destinations that were once seen as secondary options have invested heavily in infrastructure, marketing, and ease of entry. Improved airports, simplified visas, and targeted promotions make alternatives easier to choose. For long-haul travelers, this matters. When someone is already committing to a long flight, they tend to compare experiences rather than default to familiar choices. If another destination offers a similar experience at a slightly lower cost or with fewer complications, loyalty weakens. Thailand used to benefit from momentum. Once travelers arrived, many returned. Repeat visits were common, especially among those who stayed longer or explored beyond the main tourist areas. That repeat behavior is less guaranteed now. Instead of returning out of habit, travelers reassess. They compare notes, they look at newer destinations, they split trips between countries rather than staying in one place. Crowds still exist, but they behave differently. They arrive for specific reasons, festivals, seasons, social media trends, and then move on. The result is a tourism pattern marked by bursts of intensity rather than steady flow. For places built around continuous tourism, this creates a feeling of inconsistency. A beach can feel busy one week and noticeably quiet the next. A popular street can feel alive at night but empty during the day. Visitors sense this immediately, not as a failure but as a change in energy. Thailand hasn't lost its appeal, but the way people engage with it has become more selective and more strategic. Instead of wandering, travelers target. Instead of lingering, they move efficiently. That shift doesn't show up clearly in headlines or statistics. It shows up in atmosphere, in quieter afternoons, in shorter stays, and in the feeling that activity is concentrated rather than spread. The crowds didn't disappear. They reorganized, and that reorganization is reshaping Thailand's tourism landscape in subtle but meaningful ways. Beyond rising prices and shifting crowds, deeper structural changes are quietly reshaping Thailand's tourism landscape. These changes aren't always visible to visitors, but they influence nearly every decision travelers make. One of the most significant shifts is how people travel and work. Remote work has altered expectations. Travelers now look for places where they can stay longer, work reliably, and live comfortably without constant friction. Thailand still attracts remote workers, but it no longer stands alone. Other countries in the region have adapted quickly, offering clearer visa options, streamlined processes, and targeted incentives designed to capture long-term visitors. As competition grows, travelers compare details more closely. Internet reliability, housing availability, healthcare access, and bureaucratic clarity matter more than they used to. Thailand performs well in many of these areas, but uncertainty around long-term stays has made some travelers hesitant. What was once assumed now requires confirmation. Infrastructure improvements inside Thailand have had mixed effects. Transportation has become more efficient, making it easier to move between major hubs. But this efficiency also concentrates tourists into fewer locations. Visitors spend less time in transit towns and secondary destinations, bypassing places that once benefited from passing traffic. Tourism becomes denser rather than broader. Environmental considerations add another layer. To protect natural resources, access to certain areas has been restricted or limited. These measures are necessary and widely supported, but they reduce capacity and spontaneity. Visitors must plan ahead, reserve entry slots, and follow stricter guidelines. The experience becomes more structured. That structure subtly changes how Thailand feels as a destination. Discovery used to be organic. Travelers stumbled upon beaches, neighborhoods, and experiences by accident. Now, many of those experiences require foresight and the scheduling. This isn't a flaw, it's a transformation. At the same time, tourism itself has become more segmented. Different groups arrive with very specific goals. Short-term visitors seeking highlights, long-stay travelers optimizing budgets, digital nomads balancing work and leisure. Each group interacts with the country differently, and that diversity creates uneven demand. Some areas thrive under this model. Others struggle to adapt. Behind the scenes, businesses adjust accordingly. Staffing models shift. Operating hours change. Investments become more cautious. Instead of expanding broadly, businesses focus on peak periods and high-margin offerings. The result is a tourism ecosystem that still functions but with less margin for error. Thailand isn't collapsing under these changes, it's adapting to them. But adaptation comes with trade-offs. Flexibility decreases, planning increases. The experience becomes more deliberate. For many travelers, this is acceptable, even desirable. For others, it quietly erodes what once made Thailand feel special. The country still offers culture, beauty, and warmth. But the systems that once allowed travelers to move effortlessly through it are more complex than they were before. These structural changes don't make headlines, they don't spark outrage, but they shape behavior over time. And in tourism, behavior is everything. To understand how Thailand's tourism landscape is changing, you don't need statistics. You feel it by walking through places that once moved at a constant pace. Nothing looks broken. Shops are open, streets are active, cafes serve customers throughout the day, beaches still fill during the right hours. From a distance, everything appears functional and familiar. But when you spend time in these spaces, the atmosphere feels different. Popular areas still draw visitors, but activity no longer spreads evenly. Certain streets stay busy while nearby blocks remain quiet. Restaurants open but close earlier than they once did. Bars operate selectively, adjusting hours based on demand rather than routine. There's less overflow. Tourists tend to cluster. They visit well-known spots, take photos, and move on. Lingering feels less common. Instead of drifting through neighborhoods, many travelers follow efficient paths from one highlight to the next. Local businesses adapt to this pattern. Some reduce staff during slower hours, others focus on peak seasons rather than year-round consistency. Menus shrink, operating days narrow. These aren't signs of failure, they're signs of adjustment. Conversations with locals often reflect this reality. There's rarely alarm, but there is awareness. People talk about timing more than volume. Good weeks and quiet weeks alternate. Planning matters more than it used to. Even beaches reflect this shift. They still look beautiful, but chairs empty faster. Visitors arrive later and leave earlier. Long, unstructured days become shorter, scheduled ones. This doesn't make the experience worse. For some travelers, it actually makes it calmer. Less congestion, more space, fewer crowds at certain times of day. But for those who remember Thailand at its busiest, the contrast stands out. What once felt effortless now feels intentional. Experiences still exist, but they require more effort to find. The country still delivers, but it no longer carries visitors as easily as it once did. This change is subtle, which makes it powerful. There's no moment where tourism stops working, instead it quietly rebalances. For travelers, this often translates into shorter stays. People arrive with clear goals and leave once they've checked them off. Repeat visits happen less automatically. Loyalty becomes conditional rather than assumed. For businesses, the ground feels less stable. Revenue depends more heavily on timing and trends. A strong season matters more because slower periods stretch longer. Thailand still feels alive, it still feels welcoming, but it feels more reserved. That reservation doesn't signal decline, it signals transition. Tourism hasn't disappeared from Thailand, it has become more controlled, more selective, and more uneven. And that change shapes the emotional experience just as much as it shapes the economy. Visitors may not articulate this feeling clearly. They may not complain or even consciously notice it, but they respond to it through behavior, by staying less, spending differently, and planning more carefully. And in tourism, those small behavioral changes accumulate faster than any headline ever could. Thailand is not running out of tourists in the way headlines often imply. Planes are still landing, hotels are still operating, beaches still fill during the right seasons. From a numerical standpoint, the tourism continues. But numbers don't tell the full story. What Thailand may be running out of is a certain kind of visitor, the traveler who arrived without hesitation, stayed without planning, and returned without questioning the decision. That type of tourism powered the country for decades, and it relied heavily on feeling rather than calculation. As that feeling changes, behavior follows. The future of Thai tourism depends less on whether people come and more on how they come. Shorter stays, tighter itineraries, more selective spending. These patterns are already visible even if they don't register as a crisis. Thailand still offers extraordinary value in culture, food, landscapes, and hospitality. But value is no longer assumed, it's compared. Travelers weigh Thailand against other destinations more carefully than before. Loyalty becomes conditional. Repeat visits require justification. This doesn't mean decline is inevitable. It means the country is entering a different phase. If Thailand continues investing in infrastructure, services, and quality while maintaining accessibility, higher costs may feel reasonable. Many travelers are willing to pay more when they believe the experience delivers. Modernization doesn't have to come at the expense of warmth or spontaneity. But perception matters. If affordability erodes faster than the sense of value, hesitation grows. And hesitation in tourism is powerful. It doesn't stop people from coming entirely. It encourages them to shorten trips, split destinations, or explore alternatives. Tourism thrives when visitors feel welcomed rather than managed, when discovery feels organic rather than scheduled. when staying longer feels like a reward rather than a calculation. Thailand hasn't lost those qualities, but they require more care to maintain than they once did. For now, the country exists in between phases, no longer the effortless default, but not yet something entirely different. How Thailand navigates this moment will shape who arrives next, and how long they stay. The story isn't over, it's simply changing. And in tourism, change doesn't announce itself loudly. It happens quietly, one decision at a time.